Breaking tonight, the global race for critical minerals just found its most powerful new alliance. Australia and Canada didn't wait for Washington's permission. They built one themselves. Competition is escalating across the entire mineral supply chain tonight. Two nations sitting on the world's most coveted resources have just signed landmark agreements that could reshape how the West secures its industrial and defense future. And here's what makes this extraordinary. Neither country is a superpower. Both are middle powers, and both just decided that middle powers together are more than enough. Everyone believed the critical minerals crisis would be solved by great powers throwing money at the problem. Wall Street expected China to remain unchallenged in processing and supply. Analysts assumed smaller producer nations would compete against each other for favor from Washington or Beijing. They were all utterly wrong. Canberra, March 5, 2026. Inside the chambers of the Australian Parliament, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before lawmakers and delivered a line that will echo through the corridors of every foreign ministry in the Indo-Pacific. In a world of great power rivalry, middle powers have a choice: compete for favor or combine for strength. Translation: Australia and Canada just told the entire world that they are no longer waiting at the table. They are building their own. And what happened next? The two nations that together produce roughly a third of all global lithium and uranium and more than 40% of the world's iron ore announced a package of new agreements covering critical minerals, defense, maritime security, trade, and artificial intelligence. The message to Beijing, and for that matter, to Washington, could not have been clearer. These two nations are done being dependent. They are done being passive. And they are absolutely done being told what their resources are worth by someone who didn't dig them out of the ground. Dear viewers, to understand why this moment matters, you need to understand the battlefield it is happening on. Critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, gallium, antimony, uranium are not luxury commodities. They are the oxygen supply of the modern economy. Every electric vehicle battery, every semiconductor chip, every precision-guided missile, every submarine sonar array, all of it runs on minerals that most of the world can't produce at scale, and that most of the world currently has to buy from one country. That country is China. Beijing controls not just the extraction, but the processing and refining of the majority of the world's critical mineral supply. It doesn't matter if Australia digs lithium out of the Pilbara or Canada pulls uranium from the Athabasca Basin. For years, much of it has ended up running through Chinese refineries before it becomes anything useful. That is the chokehold. That is the leverage. And that is exactly the vulnerability that Canberra and Ottawa have just committed to dismantling together. The G7 Critical Minerals Alliance, a Canadian-led initiative to diversify and secure global supply, now has Australia formally signed on as a member. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a structural shift. Australia, which has already committed a $1 $2 billion, roughly $850 million US, to build a national critical minerals stockpile beginning with antimony, gallium, and rare earths, will now align that stockpile strategy directly with Canada's own defense stockpiling regime. 2 stockpiles, 2 producer nations, 1 coordinated strategy. Australian Resources Minister Madeleine King put it plainly ahead of Carney's visit. There's a lot Canada and Australia can do together on critical minerals as producer nations. That sentence sounds modest. What it describes is revolutionary, because the power in the critical mineral space has never been about who has the resources. Everyone knows Australia has the resources. Everyone knows Canada has the resources. The power has always been about who controls the next step, the processing, the refining, the manufacturing, the delivery into the supply chains of NATO members, chip manufacturers, and defense contractors. What Canberra and Ottawa are now building together is the ability to own that next step themselves. Canada's Energy and Mining Minister Tim Hodgson made the strategic logic explicit on Tuesday, telling Reuters that the best way to address the concentrated supply problem is through a production alliance, a buyer's club, not just a price floor. That distinction is everything. A price floor is passive. It says we want more money for our minerals. A production alliance is active. It says we control how these minerals move through the global economy, and we decide who gets access. Australia and Canada together are not asking for a better deal. They are becoming the deal maker. Now consider the timing. Mark Carney is in the middle of a multi-leg Asia-Pacific tour that also takes in Japan and India. His stop in Canberra included the first address to the Australian Parliament by a Canadian leader since 2007, 19 years of silence. And then suddenly a historic speech. Why now? because the world has shifted. The Trump administration's tariff agenda, its transactional approach to alliances, its weaponization of trade policy, all of it has sent a clear signal to middle powers everywhere. Relying on Washington for economic security is not a strategy. It is a vulnerability. Canada knows this more acutely than almost anyone, having watched a decades-long friendship with the United States be leveraged as a bargaining chip in a negotiation it never asked to be part of. Australia knows it too. The years of Chinese trade coercion, the barley tariffs, the wine bans, the coal embargo, taught Canberra a lesson that has never been forgotten. Dependence on a single dominant partner, whether for exports or for supply chains, is not a trade relationship. It is a hostage situation. The Australia-Canada agreement is what happens when two intelligent, stable, democratic nations look at the world they are living in and make a rational decision. If the great powers are going to compete at the expense of everyone else, then the middle powers will cooperate for the benefit of themselves. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese framed it with exactly the precision the moment demanded. Australia and Canada are middle powers in a world that is changing. We cannot change it back, but we can back ourselves, back our citizens, and back each other. Read that again. Back each other. Not petition Washington. Not negotiate with Beijing. Not wait for the United Nations to pass a resolution. Back each other. This is the new architecture of middle power solidarity. It is not a formal military alliance. It is not a trade bloc with a charter and a headquarters. It is two nations that share democratic values, resource wealth, strategic geography, and a clear-eyed understanding of their moment in history, deciding to act like the serious players they have always been. And the practical consequences are immediate and concrete. Aligned stockpiling regimes mean that when either nation faces supply disruption or when either faces coercion, the other can help fill the gap. Joint membership in the G7 Minerals Alliance means they are not just bilateral partners, but co-architects of the Western world's response to Chinese mineral dominance. Deepened cooperation on defense and maritime security means the relationship extends far beyond what's in the ground and into how both nations protect their interests in an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific. The agreement also covers trade and artificial intelligence, two areas where the convergence of democratic values and technological ambition matters enormously. AI development requires semiconductors. Semiconductors require rare earths and gallium. Rare earths and gallium are sitting beneath Australian and Canadian soil in quantities that would make the whole supply chain question answerable, if only the infrastructure and the political will existed to unlock them. That political will just showed up in the Australian Parliament in a Canadian accent. Here's what the analysts who focus only on great powers consistently miss. The great powers need the middle powers more than the middle powers need any single great power. China needs lithium. The United States needs rare earths. Europe needs uranium. Japan needs iron ore. None of them can get it without going through nations like Australia and Canada. The leverage has always existed. What has been missing is the coordination to use it. That coordination is now being built, deal by deal, agreement by agreement, stockpile aligned with stockpile, alliance stacked upon alliance. Western nations have been talking about diversifying their critical mineral supply chains away from China for years. The rhetoric has been loud. The action has been slow. What Australia and Canada are building together is not rhetoric. It is a production partnership between two of the world's most geologically blessed, institutionally stable, and strategically aware nations that happen to sit at opposite ends of the Pacific, connected not just by history and language, but by a shared understanding of what this moment in history requires. Dear viewers, what happened in Canberra today is bigger than a bilateral trade deal. It is a signal about how the global order is reorganizing itself. Not around the dominance of superpowers, but around the cooperation of capable, confident, democratic middle powers who have decided that the best response to a world of great power rivalry is to stop competing for favor and start combining for strength. Australia did not blink. Canada did not hesitate. And the world's critical mineral map just changed. If you believe that Australia's strategic choices matter for the future of the Indo-Pacific and for the future of the global economy, hit subscribe now. This channel covers every development, every agreement, and every power shift that shapes where this region is headed. We are just getting started.